Hey everybody, welcome to the briefing room on this Thursday. I'm Devin Dwyer with our political director, Rick Klein. A lot to get to today with Iran. The president taking his foot off the gas. This conflict that seemed unavoidable with Iran after that drone was shot down overnight now seems on hold, as the president says this all could be one giant misunderstanding and mistake. We'll dig in on that in a second. We're also talking today with presidential candidate, Democratic presidential candidate, Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio. He's here to respond both to the Iran situation and also to this controversy surrounding former Vice President Joe Biden. We'll get into that coming up shortly as well. And some breaking news just a few minutes ago out of Alabama that Rick Klein will give his analysis on. You remember candidate Roy Moore for the Alabama Senate race? Well, he is back. He's going to get in after losing in 2017. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But we start with the news out of Iran today, and the White House at this hour holding an emergency meeting with President Trump and his advisors. Rick, this has big political ramifications. The president's sort of in a hot spot here. On the one hand, needing to play to his base and the party that wants a tough line on Iran, at the same time also trying to keep that promise of keeping the U.S. out of a new war in the Middle East. Yeah, he drew that red line, and now it looks like he's blurring it, if not erasing it, by giving himself an exit ramp to this escalation. It looked like we were there. The Pentagon was certainly pointing in that direction by pointing to this evidence, and it seemed like we were going to have a military reaction to Iran. Now the president is suggesting that maybe it's all a big misunderstanding. And Jordan Phelps is our White House reporter. She's there on the North Lawn. Jordan, tell us what's going on at this hour. What is the meeting underway, and what options are on the table?
Hey, Devin, congressional leaders are here for that emergency meeting you alluded to. They're in the Situation Room with the president, talking, of course, about this very important situation. We've heard some mixed messages, as you know, from President Trump. He has been very firm in his rhetoric on Iran, but he also today is now saying that this could be a mistake. He's sounding very much like a president who does not want military conflict, but we'll see if Iran forces his hand here.
And just a short time ago, the president in the Oval Office with the Canadian Prime Minister visiting today had this to say about that drone that was shot down overnight.
Fortunately, that drone was unarmed. There was no man in it, and it was over international waters, clearly over international waters, but we didn't have a man or woman in the drone. We had nobody in the drone.
Are you still open?
It would have made a big difference, let me tell you. It would have made a big, big difference. But I have a feeling, I may be wrong, and I may be right, but I'm right a lot. I have a feeling that it was a mistake made by somebody that shouldn't have been doing what they did. I don't know. I find it hard to believe it was intentional, if you want to know the truth. I think that it could have been somebody who was loose and stupid that did it. We'll be able to report back, and you'll understand exactly what happened. But it was a very foolish move. That I can tell you.
Do you feel like there are members of your administration who are trying to push you into conflict?
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, in many cases, it's the opposite. But I will say, look, I said I want to get out of these endless wars. But this is a new wrinkle. This is a new fly in the ointment, what happened shooting down the drone. And this country will not stand for it. That I can tell you. Thank you very much.
A fly in the ointment, something that the president really is seeming to downplay, Rick Klein. Also struck by the fact that the president says he thinks this may not have been intentional, as the Iranians are coming out and saying explicitly on the record, the foreign ministry saying this was intentional. We shot it down. Yeah, the Iranians are saying that. The Pentagon is producing no evidence to back up what the president is saying. We haven't heard anything from the intelligence community in this, and I think the silence is deafening, because if this is just the president, if this is a negotiating strategy, or if this is just his guesswork looking for the Iranians to say, well, yeah, maybe it was a mistake, it's hard to even figure out what he could be talking about here, and he and the White House have not provided any answers to that. What set this incident apart from those other incidents in the Persian Gulf of the past couple of weeks with those oil tankers that were hit is that this one, of course, involved a U.S. asset, a $120 million piece of equipment that was shot out of the sky over international waters. And our Elizabeth McLaughlin over at the Pentagon has been tracking what the Pentagon is saying, both about the drone and their attempts to recover the drone, but also about what options are on the table. Elizabeth, the president is steering away from an immediate response, but he's not ruling it out. What are some things that the military could be considering right now?
Well, Devin, there are, of course, a lot of options here. We could see a very proportional strike on the behalf of the U.S., maybe hitting some air missile defense systems within Iran or some Navy assets that they may have if they wanted to send a signal in response to the oil tankers. All of that really remains to be seen, and that certainly must be one of the discussions happening right now in the Situation Room, as Jordan said. And right now, the U.S. Navy is looking to recover pieces of that Global Hawk drone that was shot down this morning. We are still waiting to see if you can see that video there. That is what they say the U.S. military released earlier today that shows trails of that drone as it was hit by an Iranian missile. They also released a map showing exactly where it was. And I think what Zarif was saying, the Iranian foreign minister, was that Iran did this purposely because they said that drone was in their airspace. That is not what we're hearing from the U.S. military today. They had a press conference earlier and released a statement saying very unequivocally that this drone was in international airspace. That means it would have been within 12 nautical miles outside of Iranian airspace. And so Iran then countered and spun up their own maps, and the foreign minister tweeting his own maps of what they say is the trajectory of this path. So there could be a miscommunication here between the two countries, but you're certainly, what we're all looking for is what happens next.
Former Trump Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert joins us as well via FaceTime. Tom, it's great to see you. I guess the big question for you is, are you surprised, Tom, that the president, for all of his tough talk, didn't order an immediate military response to the fact that this drone was destroyed? How do you parse that?
Yeah, Devin, thanks for having me. A couple of things I thought were revealing for the president today. He and I used to talk about anytime you consider using military force, you have to make sure it's just, then you have to make sure it's necessary, and then you have to make sure that we can achieve the results you want to achieve through using that force. And what I saw the president do today and his team was to knock out that first question. We are justified in our use of force here, not only because we can defend ourselves in the interest of self-defense under Article 51, but we can prove it that you shot down our drone over international waters and not over your space. So that, step one, allows the president the flexibility to consider options. But step two is a question of framing, and that's really the question that you're asking here today. The question is, do you frame this, as the president has, as a reaction to shooting down an unmanned drone, or do you frame it as an escalating series of bad, disruptive Iranian behavior that we need to now correct through the larger application of force? Because remember, we have to be proportional in our own self-defense. And for those that frame it as something larger and broader, they're going to want to advocate for a lot of targets of big, muscular response. And for those that would like to frame it as a smaller individual shoot down of a drone without a human in it, well, then maybe the targets are smaller, the operations and the risk associated with retaliation are smaller. And I think we saw the president giving himself enough space to justify taking either option.
And real quick before I let you go, Tom, do you think there is a downside to letting this go unanswered in any way, though, even in the broader context as you framed it there?
Well, I don't want to go too far into giving advice to the president, not knowing everything he knows, but I believe there is a downside, and I think if he chooses to frame it as just a response to the unacceptable shooting down of one of our aircraft, then perhaps the targets would be the surface-to-air missile base where that missile came from, maybe something a little smaller, akin to what we saw when he sent a message to Syria on their use of chemical weapons.
Tom Bossert, our ABC News contributor, former Trump Homeland Security Advisor. Thanks a lot, Tom. Great to see you, and our thanks to Jordan Phelps and Elizabeth McLaughlin as well. Rick, this also guarantees that Iran and a good element of foreign policy will be included in this first Democratic primary debate. How do you think the candidates handled this situation on the stage?
It's not a clean one for Democratic candidates. I mean, the reflexive response is to criticize the president, but there are a whole lot of Democratic candidates right now that don't think militarily engaging with Iran is a good idea at all. It's complications for Joe Biden, who, of course, was part of the nuclear deal that the president undid and is railed against, but also was part of the Obama administration that blurred that red line with Syria. So there are complications for almost every one of the Democrats in their own ways, and I'm actually really interested, legitimately interested to see how it plays out, because foreign policy hasn't been front and center so far. But
it, in all likelihood, will come up, certainly as it's top of mind in the news today. Speaking of Joe Biden, let's bring in our Joe Biden reporter, Molly Nagel. She's here because the former vice president is embroiled in quite a controversy, Molly, and I thought we would sort of do a regroup regroup today for our viewers on what this firestorm over comments from Joe Biden is all about, what he said, who he said it to. So break it down for us. A couple nights ago, the former vice president was holding a fundraiser, and he's made some pretty controversial comments.
Right. So this all started on Tuesday evening at a fundraiser in New York City for Biden's campaign. These events are open to the press by one reporter who sends out a note to the rest of the.
So no cameras.
So no cameras are there, but we hear a report of what was said at the events. And in the report, we saw that Joe Biden talked about his time in the Senate serving alongside segregational senators and how he worked together with them even though he didn't agree. His comments, he never called me boy, he always called me son. That was speaking about James O. Eastland. And then he also talked about Herman Talmadge, one of the meanest guys I ever knew. Well, guess what? At least there was some civility. We got some things done.
So he was making this point that he was able to work with people that he detested. He found horrible people. He got some accomplishments. But really, so there's the comparison that is made that's causing some consternation, but then also the quip he made about, I've never got called boy.
And look, this is not the first time Biden has talked about working alongside these segregationists. We saw it in Concord, New Hampshire, just earlier this month. He talked about being in Congress or being in the Senate alongside some of these folks. And he's also talked about the fact that Eastland often said he always called me son. He usually says he never called me senator. Obviously, a very big difference in the language here, and that's what's causing a lot of the pickup here and a lot of consternation from his 2020 opponents.
Let's bring Byron Pitts into the conversation. He is our host of Nightline, also named Journalist of the Year by the National Association of Black Journalists. Joins us from New York. Byron, it's great to see you. You've covered race and politics throughout your career. Give us some context around these comments, why they're considered offensive, and I guess sort of answer the question, if you could, are we just all being the PC police here, or is there really something to what Joe Biden said?
Well, I think it depends who you talk to. I think for many people, certainly in Black America, at best, it was an eye roll, right? It's annoying. I think for many people, this potentially feeds into the narrative for Joe Biden that he represents the past, what the Democratic Party may have represented 20 years, 30 years ago. And that's not good for him moving forward. Certainly, I think for many people, the word boy carries real baggage, painful baggage. There was a time in our country where a black man, no matter his measure of distinction in our society, could be referred to as a boy. It's offensive. It is in some circles a replacement for the N-word. And so I think for many people, at first glance, it would seem that Vice President Biden didn't fully get it. And certainly there were candidates like Cory Booker and Senator Harris who made an effort to point that out. And he didn't make situations better when he said, well, Cory Booker should apologize to me. So I think for him in the short term, this is problematic. But as we saw, the members of the Congressional Black Caucus came out in support of Joe Biden very quickly. His friend Jim Clyburn, the majority whip from South Carolina, a very powerful politician in the Democratic Party, certainly Congressional Black Caucus backed him up because the political calculation is, look, Joe Biden for Democrats is still a better option than Donald Trump, right? And so if he becomes their guy, then they have to stick with him and they have to weather this. I think the potential problem from him is that if it feeds into this narrative that this is a 76-year-old politician who doesn't get where America is now. I think many people, certainly in the Black Congressional Caucus and some circles of Black America, will be willing to forgive him if he becomes the option against Donald Trump. But it is disturbing. It speaks to a painful episode in our nation's history. I mean, I can remember as a small boy with my family in North Carolina and being out with my uncles. These were men who served in the military, came back as decorated war heroes, and we would go into stores, and a white man would refer to them as boy. That lives with me. I know a number of my friends had the same story to tell, and there's a sense, whether real or imagined, that Vice President Biden didn't fully get that.
Yeah, as Cory Booker put it, you don't joke about calling black men boys. At the same time, Rick, a lot of the vice president's critics, some of his rivals, all acknowledge that this vice president is not a racist by any measure, maybe insensitive. And so to Byron's point, this can feed into an impression people are starting to form very early in this race about a leading candidate. This can get bad really quickly.
Yeah, we've heard from some of his political allies. This is Barack Obama's wingman, his running mate, his number two. You think he would have been an avowed or secret racist in all of this? I don't think that's the question here. I don't think anyone is seriously questioning, is Joe Biden a racist? I think, to Byron's point, they're questioning whether he's learned the lessons of where politics have moved over the last couple of decades. And I'll tell you, to Byron's point about asking Booker to apologize, that went over very poorly. And if you were looking to tamp this down, that did the exact opposite. Because if you have Cory Booker saying, look, you don't understand, and you have to learn and understand where I'm coming from, to come back and say, go apologize for even suggesting that does not get it at all.
And Molly, he seems to be taking this, former vice president takes it very personally. He came out last night of another event as the firestorm is swirling. It was defiant in his tone, publicly, in front of cameras this time, really not backing down.
Certainly not apologizing like Cory Booker has asked him to. Biden, outside of another fundraiser in Maryland last night, came out and talked to the cameras and reiterated his point that, I did not agree with these people. My point was that you have to work together. Sometimes you won't like what they're saying, but using very different language as well. Not talking about working together, talking about beating them, and talking about that you shouldn't change the system to beat them. You should, beat them at their own game. So
he's laying low today.
Laying low today, but he's headed to South Carolina to head to the James Clyburn Fish Fry and big event for any 2020 candidate. And ahead of that, also just announcing 11 endorsements from some mayors, former and current, in South Carolina. So clearly trying to move past these comments.
So we will certainly hear more from him. In South Carolina, a state where African-American issues are very significant, this is likely to come up. Thank you guys for the conversation. Byron Pitts, thank you so much for the perspective and for joining us from New York. We asked one of former Vice President Joe Biden's rivals about this controversy a short time ago. Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio stopped by the briefing room. We asked him what he thinks about what the vice president had to say. All right, we don't have that interview right now, unfortunately, so hopefully we can come back to it. Guys, let's move on to some other breaking news in the political world. Just a few moments ago, we learned that Alabama Senator, Alabama Senate wannabe, Roy Moore, is back in the race. Rick, give us the significance of this. This is a candidate who President Trump says he didn't want to see back in the Republican Party.
Well, it's because he lost last time in Alabama as a Republican. This is the former Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, twice removed from that office for defying different court orders. And in this event, his rise came along with a whole lot of baggage that was unearthed about some inappropriate conduct and contacts that he had with underage people back 30, 40 years ago. You layer that on top of a very problematic public record. President Trump endorsed his rival, who was the then sitting senator, appointed Senator Luther Strange, in the primaries. Strange lost. Then he endorsed Roy Moore, stuck with him through all of this, and Roy Moore did the unthinkable, which is to lose to a Democrat in the state of Alabama. So the entire Republican establishment wants him gone. They want to be done with him. There are lots of other Republicans in Alabama that would like a shot at this. There's even talk about Jeff Sessions coming back to run again.
Can you imagine the President of the United States campaigning for his former Attorney General?
I've tried, and there aren't enough twists inside my brain to get to that scenario where, yes, President Trump would have to campaign for Jeff Sessions to stop Roy Moore. I'll tell you, though, I mean, people in the political world are kind of laughing at this. He is a very popular figure. He won the primary last time, and I said at the time that was Trumpism beating Trump himself. And that is a powerful force that he is able to corral, that sense of the outsider. Don't count him out. Don't just say there's no way he can win a primary. It's Alabama, and it is a guy that has a political force that actually has quite an overlap with President Trump's, even if the Trump family wants him gone.
We shall see. A lot at stake in Alabama and the Senate at large.
The biggest pickup opportunity.
2020.
Yeah, the biggest pickup opportunity for that party.
So Rick Klein, thank you so much. Molly Nagel, thank you so much. I don't know if we have our Tim Ryan interview ready to go. We do. Okay, we'll go back now to current Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio. His thoughts on Joe Biden and the rest of the 2020 race.
Clearly, he's not a racist, but he said something that he shouldn't have said. My concern really is that he needs to know that using that example in 2019 is not the example you use to communicate to people that you're willing to work across the aisle.
So you see an insensitivity there?
Yeah, I mean, it's just you shouldn't say that stuff. I mean, you know that that's an issue. Why would you use that as an example? You probably have a lot of other examples you could have used, and I think that a little bit of a tin ear on some of this stuff.
You think he owes an apology to people?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
You and the former vice president share a lot in common. Actually, you were both Catholic. You're both proud of your Irish ancestry. You were football players. You've both had slightly different positions on abortion over the years. How do you differentiate yourself from Joe Biden, the frontrunner?
Well, who I am, where I come from, first and foremost. I mean, I've been living in the epicenter of deindustrialization for the last 40 years. And when these factories close, I know who's in them. I could tell you stories of my cousins, my father-in-law. Like when the General Motors plant closed a few weeks ago, those were our family members. Those were our friends. And I think the next president has to deeply understand what they're going through today. And I think there are issues, too. I mean, I voted against every trade agreement. The vice president has supported a lot of the trade agreements that really decimated communities like mine on a lot of the big banking issues of Glass-Steagall and those kind of things.
So we're just a few days away from the first debate. Now, you're sharing the stage, Congressman, with Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, Beto O'Rourke. What's your strategy going to that? Are you sizing up these guys? Are you reading up on their positions?
I got the game films going.
Do you really?
No, I'm kidding. I mean, it's more about me getting my message out. I think there's going to be a small window periodically throughout the 2 hours, and I'm going to try to get the message out about who I am and where I come from. I really think this election is going to be about the Democrats nominating someone who can really prosecute the economic argument against Trump, and coming from Northeast Ohio, we need to win those states. So I'm going to try to communicate to people that Democrats shifting the center of gravity of the Democratic Party really from the coasts in the Ivy Leagues, which is the perception for the rest of the country about the Democrats, to a place like Youngstown, Ohio. And I think that opens up a real opportunity for us to reclaim the industrial Midwest.
Abortion, another big topic. The campaign, until a few years ago,
we're hitting all the hot ones
here.
We're
just doing a quick round here. You were a pro-life Democrat.
Yeah.
Sort of a rare breed. You changed your mind and now support abortion rights. Tell us about that decision. How did you arrive at that change? And do you think there's still room in the party for pro-life Democrats?
So when I came to Congress, I was 29 years old. When I got into politics, I was 27. I grew up in a Catholic family and a Catholic community, and my position was I was a pro-life Democrat. And when I got to Congress, I started meeting women who had abortions. And I probably met women who had abortions before, but I never knew it, and knew it when I met them, and I never talked to them about it. And it was really those stories of women and the circumstances that they were in that really helped me realize that the government has no place between the woman and her doctor, and that is a decision that should be left to the woman. And so I, over time, slowly changed my position around that. And, again, this is a really important issue because of the attacks that are happening in many of these states,
including in Ohio.
Yeah.
It is summertime, and unfortunately, a lot of hot car deaths are an issue around this country. 11 already so far this year. I know this has been an issue that's been close to you as a dad, personal to you. You've introduced some legislation to push automakers, some of which have ties to your community, to do more to help all of us that drive cars avoid those deaths. Tell us about the legislation that you've got on the table.
There'll be 40 kids this year that will die from being left in the car. And parents, they get out of a routine, or drivers get out of the routine of dropping off the kid, and something changes.
Has it ever happened to you with Brady?
No, fortunately not. But I think about it, probably because I'm working on this issue, I think about it all the time. But we get notices for you left your keys in the car, or your lights are on, or something else is happening. You get all kinds of notices. So our bill mandates that the car companies have to provide notice on the dashboard or somewhere, bells, whistles, something, to notify you that you have something in the back seat. And you can use sensors to make this happen.
You introduced this last year. You made a big push for it. It unfortunately failed.
Yeah.
What do you see as being different this year? How do you combat the industry which says, listen, we need more public awareness, we don't need more regulations?
Yeah, well, too bad. I mean, we need this technology in the car, and this year we have bipartisan support, both in the Senate and in the House. So bicameral, bipartisan. I think we're going to be able to get it done this year.
All right, thanks again to Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio, one of the 23 Democratic candidates for president this year. He'll be on stage Tuesday night next week with Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke, and Cory Booker. Finally today, some major news out of the Supreme Court today. The biggest case in 15 years involving the First Amendment and religious freedom in this country, and those thousands of religious symbols all around our country that stand on public land. The case involved a 40-foot, 16-ton World War I memorial. There it is, up in Bladensburg, Maryland. It's called the Peace Cross. A bunch of humanists in that area had sued to have the cross taken down. It's on public land, and the Supreme Court today, in a major 7-2 decision, said that cross can stand. Justice Samuel Alito, one of the conservatives, wrote that that cross has special significance to World War I. It has taken on a secular purpose in our country. It's a win for all of those symbols and cemeteries and on government property. A lot of disappointment. Ruth Bader Ginsburg protesting this, saying our Constitution demands neutrality when dealing with religious symbols. After the court's decision, I caught up with Kelly Shackelford. He's the president, CEO, and chief counsel of First Liberty, one of the groups defending the cross, to get his reaction.
I think most people realize if you tear this memorial down that's been up almost 100 years, you're 2 miles away is Arlington. You got to go into Arlington and tear down the large crosses. So I think most people thought we were going to win. They just didn't know how big the win, and in particular, whether they're going to get rid of this 50-year-old precedent called Lemon that has created a lot of these attacks on our memorials and monuments, and that was the thing to be watching for. And we didn't get the little win, we got the big win. I think we're going to see a real change when it comes to monuments, memorials. Think of all the attacks, nativity scenes, right, menorahs, all these cases.
Well, the case law has been so muddled here at the Supreme Court. Justice Alito did say that some of these long-standing memorials, this one was built in 1925, he said it's taken on a secular meaning, really. Yeah. It's been there for so long. What do you make of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's argument from the bench? Very passionate. She read her dissent today. You were in the courtroom. She also included some pictures here in the back of her opinion of some secular war memorials. She said there's no reason that this needed to be a cross.
Well, I mean, it's what was used back in World War I. You go anywhere in the world, it's because of all those graves. 14 million people died in World War I. I mean, they were just putting up gravestone. Well, they couldn't put up a gravestone, so they put up crosses and Stars of David, and those are religious symbols. But I think the point is that we have religious and secular monuments and symbols throughout our landscape because we have a religious and a secular history. We're not sort of a religious KGB, like we go and knock down all the religious monuments or memorials. That would be kind of a religious cleansing. That's not what the country's about. And so what they said here today is, look, we have that religious heritage and history. You're going to see religious symbols. I mean, Moses is holding the Ten Commandments
inside the chamber there.
So we're not knocking those things down. So I think what Justice Ginsburg was saying is that you can't have these sectarian symbols. It's just not consistent with who we are as a people. And the founders would be appalled at this idea that we would use the Constitution to try to tear down monuments or memorials.
Certainly things that are decades, almost 100 years old.
Yeah, so this is big.
All right, thanks again to Kelly Shackelford. Thank you for joining us today here in the briefing room at ABC News Live. We're here every day at 3:30, 5:30, 6:30. Download the ABC News app. You can watch us live 24/7 there. Get the latest on all the stories we've talked about today, including the breaking developments on the standoff between the United States and Iran. We'll be back here tomorrow at 3:30. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Hope to see you then.